Welcome to Your Cyber Path, the podcast that helps you get your dream cybersecurity job by sharing the secrets of experienced hiring managers and top cybersecurity professionals with you. Now, on to the show.
How do we do this in something like Windows?
Right. So here's where we've got to go a little on Windows internals, right? I'm not trying to turn everybody here into a programming expert or an API expert or anything like that. I'm going to keep it as simple as I can. But it is important to understand that deep inside of the Windows operating system, every Windows operating system since Windows NT, which was a long time ago, there is something in there, a little piece of logic, a little piece of code called a security reference monitor. SRM is what it's often referred to. So if you went and read the Windows API or the developer documentation, you'll find this in here. Okay, so now, what is the SRM? Well, we talked about this in the last episode when we were talking about fail-safe defaults, but the SRM is doing that complete mediation. Every time you try to access something that has an access control list that can be restricted from users, then that's what the SRM does, is it checks to see, are you really allowed to look at this thing? And that's the complete mediation. Now, here's something though that we have to understand about Windows is that it was originally designed, this SRM, to do complete mediation. In other words, if I touched a file and then I came back and touched it again right away, the SRM should check fully and completely both times, who is this and are you allowed to get to this resource? Well, in early versions of Windows, it turned out that by doing that, it was like trying to get through the checkpoint at the airport. Super, super slow. Now, when you go through the checkpoint at the airport, speed is not their top priority. We know that, right? We live that. But in an operating system, if you can't use it because it's so slow, no one's going to buy it. No one's going to use it. It's optional. So Microsoft said, yeah, that's not going to work. So what they did is they actually made some compromises to this complete mediation principle. And so instead of checking every single time you try to access a file or folder, the SRM just checks to see if you've been fully authenticated once in the past few hours. And this is a setting that you can actually manipulate if you want. But this shortcut does a couple of things. It speeds things up a lot, and it also keeps you from having to type your username and password every single time you want to access something, even if you just accessed it 2 seconds ago. So this whole idea of complete mediation doesn't always work in the real world, and it certainly didn't work in Windows. And so that's how it's actually implemented. Now, there's some downsides when you compromise on these principles, right, Jason?
Yeah, most certainly. And before we go into those, I do want to talk about the fact that, like you said, with Windows, we were doing this caching mechanism using these tickets, right? Mm-hmm. And if anybody's ever heard the term a golden ticket or a silver ticket, those are things we're talking about here in the Kerberos ticketing system inside of Windows. But again, that goes really in depth, and we're not going to go dive all the way in there. But the point I wanted to make here is that in the Windows system, they are using this cache credentials as a mechanism to speed things up. Mm-hmm. But that doesn't mean that every system does that. And as we keep moving forward and people keep talking about zero trust, we have these checkpoints over and over again where you don't use these cache credentials or use a very, very short time on those cache credentials. In the old days, it'd be very common to authenticate once and use that same ticket for 24 hours or even up to 7 days in some cases. Mm-hmm. And nowadays, we don't usually allow those to be any more than an hour at most because of that caching and the fact that our systems are so much faster. And the way to reach a system, we're not using a 10 megabit per second Cat3 Ethernet anymore. We're using gigabit Ethernet or 10 gig Ethernet. So another authentication isn't really going to slow us down that much. And
right.
So now we can have more security and less of that caching going on.
Right.
So that's one of the things I think it's important for you guys to think about that as we talk about this.
And of course, when Windows NT first came out, we were using 486 SX processors with 4 megs of RAM, yes. Right? So the hardware just didn't have the oomph to push around the complete mediation as it was originally designed. I think if we designed Windows again today, we probably could do it, right? We wouldn't probably ask somebody to authenticate, but we probably could afford the processor time to actually do complete mediation from that point of view. But that's a good point that you're making, is that with zero trust networking and zero trust architectures, we are actually going back to a more complete mediation implementation. And so that's another actually really productive way to think about it.